The first time I realized something was wrong, it was a Tuesday morning. The nurse, Laura, leaned over my bed, her voice gentle but sharp around the edges. "You've forgotten again, haven't you, Mrs. Brooks?" she said, her hand lingering too long on my wrist. Behind her, my husband stood in the doorway, arms crossed, pretending to look concerned. Henry Brooks, 65, perfectly pressed shirt, that same faint smell of cedar and arrogance. He'd been rehearsing that look for weeks now, I think the sorrowful husband caring for his poor, confused wife. I blinked up at him, forcing a small smile. "Forgotten what?" His eyes softened in mock pity. "Breakfast, sweetheart. You told me you wanted pancakes, then said you never said it. Laura just reminded you." A lie. I hadn't said a word about pancakes. I told him I wasn't hungry, but there was something in the way they looked at each other that morning, a flicker of understanding that made my chest tighten. I had always prided myself on being sharp. I was 62, not senile. I'd taught English for 35 years, raised 2 children, balanced our finances, and kept a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine. But that morning, as I sat there in my robe, the tea cooling on my nightstand, I realized they weren't talking to me, they were handling me. Like I was an inconvenience wrapped in soft fabric. My name is Evelyn Brooks, and until this year I thought I knew the man I married. We'd been together 38 years. We met in college. I was the quiet literature major. He was the business student who said he loved a woman with a good mind. I should have known that what he really loved was control. When I had my mild stroke 3 months ago, I thought it was a blessing to have Henry there, attentive, patient, saying things like, "Don't worry, sweetheart, I'll handle everything." At first he did. He paid the bills, called the doctors, even hired the nurse when he said I needed round-the-clock care. But little by little, things began to slip away from me. He told me I'd misplaced jewelry I knew I'd put away. He corrected me in front of visitors, saying, "She means last week, not yesterday," with that sympathetic little laugh. And then the pills always mixed up, bottles moved around. When I asked Laura why my dosage was different, she said, "Your husband said the doctor changed it." I never saw that doctor's note. The worst part wasn't the confusion. It was the way they looked at me. Like I was fading right in front of them, and they were just waiting for me to disappear. One evening, I heard them talking in the hallway. My bedroom door was slightly open. "She's getting worse," Laura whispered. "She always forgets conversations," Henry replied softly, but I caught the edge of satisfaction in his voice. "Keep recording when she forgets things," he added. "We'll need proof later." Proof of what? I lay there in the dark, my heart pounding in my ears. He wasn't just watching me, he was building a case. I spent the next few days pretending. I smiled when he spoke to me like a child. I let Laura write notes about my episodes. I even apologized when I forgot things I hadn't forgotten at all. Every night when they thought I was asleep, I wrote in a small notebook I kept under my pillow. Dates, times, words, the exact phrases Henry used when he spoke to the lawyer on the phone. He never changed his passwords. He thought I couldn't handle a computer anymore. But on the 4th night, when he went to bed early, I used his tablet. I found emails short, coded ones between him and a man named David Cole, his attorney. Subject lines like power of attorney, urgent, and medical declaration. That was when the pieces began to fall into place. My husband wasn't planning to take care of me. He was planning to take everything. The accounts I'd helped build with my teaching pension, the house my father left me, the savings I'd kept tucked away for our grandchildren, all of it was being reclassified under his management. And I was being reclassified too. As unfit, unreliable, unwell. It was brilliant in a way. A slow erasure signed and sealed with my own trembling hand. I closed the tablet and sat in the silence of my bedroom, every heartbeat sounding like a clock ticking down to something final. That night, when Henry came in to check on me, I pretended to be half asleep. He tucked the blanket under my chin like he always did a performance for himself more than for me, and whispered, "Rest easy, sweetheart. Soon you won't have to worry about anything at all." He kissed my forehead and walked out, closing the door gently behind him. But as the click of the latch echoed in the dark, I opened my eyes. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was awake. If they wanted to play this game, they'd chosen the wrong woman to forget. When people talk about betrayal, they always picture one moment, one loud, dramatic break. But in truth, it happens slow. 100 tiny cuts before you ever see blood. I used to think Henry and I had a good marriage. Not perfect, but solid, the kind of partnership people envied when they saw our Christmas cards or the anniversary dinners at church. I wore pearls, he told jokes. We smiled like we were built from the same script. But looking back now, I can see it clearly. The erosion started long before the nurse ever walked through my door. When our children were young, I worked 2 jobs teaching high school English during the day, tutoring at night while Henry focused on his business. He told everyone he was building a real estate empire. What he really built was an image one that fed on my labor and my silence. He handled the finances, always said it was too stressful for me. He'd pat my hand and say, "You just focus on the kids, sweetheart. I'll make sure the numbers behave." I told myself it was fine. That's what trust looks like, isn't it? You divide the weight. You let the other person carry what you can't. Except I carried plenty. When his investments failed, I picked up extra work. When he gambled away a bonus in Atlantic City, I covered the mortgage from my savings. And when he raised his voice, not in rage, but in that slow, deliberate disappointment that made me feel small, I said nothing. It's strange, the ways women are taught to keep the peace. You swallow enough of yourself, and one day you wake up realizing you've disappeared entirely. When my stroke happened, it wasn't sudden. It was a warning shot. I'd been dizzy for days, ignoring it, grading papers late into the night. Then one morning, I woke up on the kitchen floor, the smell of burnt toast and coffee thick in the air. Henry said I was lucky that he found me in time. He said all the right words: rest, recover, don't worry about a thing. But even then, in my haze, I remember how calm he sounded when he told the doctor, "She's been forgetting things lately." I wasn't, not yet, but I think he needed me to. The weeks that followed were filled with kindness that felt rehearsed. He told everyone he was taking care of his wife. I watched him beam when neighbors praised his devotion, and I, foolish me, believed it was love. Then the little things began. He accidentally changed my doctor without telling me. He said the old one retired. I found out later she hadn't. He started paying the bills through his accounts only. Less confusing that way, he said. He even sold my car, the one I'd bought with my own teaching bonus, said I wasn't fit to drive right now. Each decision came dressed as concern, but underneath it was control. And I let him. Because I was tired. Because every time I tried to argue, my words came out weaker than they used to. The truth is, Henry didn't need to drug me to make me doubt myself. He'd been doing that for years, one suggestion at a time. One night, I sat by my window, looking at the oak tree we planted when our daughter was born. 35 years of roots, branches, and storms. I thought about how that tree had survived everything, the droughts, the winters, because it had learned how to bend without breaking. And I realized that was me. I had spent nearly 4 decades bending. But that night, for the first time, I didn't want to bend anymore. A few days later, the mail came, and with it, a letter from our bank addressed to Henry Brooks, primary account holder. I almost tossed it into the pile with the rest, but something stopped me. When I opened it, my hands began to shake. It was a confirmation of his request to assume full financial management rights over all joint assets, citing my medical incapacity and cognitive decline. Those were his words. My mind went blank, then hot, then cold again. I reread the letter until the paper felt thin between my fingers. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just betrayal. This was erasure. He was rewriting who I was not, with lies shouted in public, but with forms and signatures, quietly building a future where I no longer existed. I pressed the letter flat against the table and stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it neatly and tucked it under my notebook. When Henry came home that evening, he found me sitting by the fireplace, reading one of his favorite poems, something by Frost. He smiled, poured himself a drink, and asked, "How was your day, sweetheart?" I looked up at him, calm as ever, and said, "Enlightening." He laughed like I'd told a joke. But I wasn't joking, because in that moment I knew something he didn't. I wasn't losing my mind. I was finding it again. The morning I decided to confront him, the house was too quiet. Even the clock in the hallway seemed to tick softer, like it didn't want to interrupt what was coming. I'd spent the night rehearsing in my head, over and over, the questions I'd ask, the calm tone I'd keep, the way I'd look him straight in the eye so he'd know I wasn't confused or fragile or fading. I brewed coffee myself, something I hadn't done in weeks, and waited until I heard his footsteps coming down the stairs. "Morning," he said, adjusting his cufflinks like a man about to deliver a sermon. "You're up early." I looked at him, really looked, and saw the man he'd become. Still handsome in that polished, gray-templed way, still controlled, but there was a new sharpness in his eyes, the kind men get when they believe they've already won. "I need to talk to you," I said quietly. He gave me that patient smile, the one that used to make me feel loved, and now just made me feel small. "Of course, sweetheart, but let's have breakfast first. Did Laura make your pills yet?" "I already took them," I lied. He froze for half a second, then nodded. "Good, that's good." We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The morning light spilled through the blinds, striping his face in gold and shadow. I thought about how many mornings I'd watched him read the paper there, pretending everything in our life was fine. But this time I wasn't pretending. "Henry," I said, "I got a letter from the bank yesterday." He didn't look up from his eggs. "It said you filed paperwork to assume full control of our accounts. Said it was because of my mental decline." That made him pause. Slowly, he set his fork down. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "you must have misunderstood. That's just a precaution, a formality. You've been under a lot of stress since the stroke." "Stop talking to me like I'm a child," I said. My voice came out steady, but my hands were trembling under the table. "You know exactly what that means. You're trying to take everything." His jaw tightened, just barely. Then the mask returned. "Evelyn, you're confused. That's not what this is about." The sound of a plate clattering made us both look up. Laura stood by the counter, holding a tray. Her face was pale, her eyes darting between us. "Is there a problem?" she asked. Henry turned toward her, his voice calm. "No problem, Laura. Mrs. Brooks is just having another one of her moments." That word, moments, hit me like a slap. I stood up, gripping the table. "Don't you dare make her part of this. Don't you twist my words again." Laura looked frozen, torn between us. I could see the unease in her face, the guilt she couldn't quite hide anymore. "Henry," I said, quieter now, "I know what you're doing, and I know why." He met my eyes, and for a moment the performance dropped. I saw the calculation there, cold and naked. Then he smiled again, too wide, too calm. "Evelyn," he said, his tone syrupy and slow, "you've been mixing up dreams and reality again. You've accused me of things before things you later forgot. That's a lie." "See," he said, glancing at Laura, "this is what I mean. She gets defensive, paranoid." "Stop," I said, "just stop." But he kept going, gentle and cruel at once, each word sharpening the knife. Sweetheart, you know I love you, but you're not well. Everyone can see it. That's why we brought Laura in to help keep things stable. I could feel my pulse in my throat. You mean to keep me quiet? He tilted his head. To protect you from yourself. That was the moment I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't rage, I'd burned through that already. It was colder than that. A kind of clarity, the realization that he didn't see me as a person anymore, just an obstacle to remove. I straightened up and said very softly, "You're the one losing control, Henry, not me." He chuckled, but I saw the flicker of unease. Let's not make a scene. I stepped closer. You've spent months trying to make me doubt myself, but you forgot who I was before you decided to rewrite me. He smirked. And who's that? The woman who built this house with you, the one who taught our children how to think, the one who held you together when your first business failed, the one who's about to make you regret underestimating her. For a second, his mask cracked just long enough for fear to peek through. Then he turned away. I think you should rest, he said curtly. We'll talk later when you're calm. That night, I couldn't sleep. The walls of that house felt smaller somehow, like they were holding their breath. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway, light ones, not Henry's. Then a soft knock on my door. Mrs. Brooks? It was Laura. Her voice trembled. I opened my eyes. Yes? She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. I didn't want to do this to you, she whispered, wringing her hands. But I need to tell you something. Something about Mr. Brooks. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding. She looked at me, tears gathering in her eyes. He paid me, she said. He paid me to make you look sick. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. The room was so still that even the air felt frozen. What did you just say? I whispered. Laura's face crumpled. He paid me, Mrs. Brooks, to say you were getting worse, to write things in the reports that weren't true. I sat there in the dark, the lamplight casting long, shaky shadows across the quilt. My body went cold from the inside out. How much? I asked. Because somehow that detail mattered. I needed to know the price of my sanity. $5,000 a month, she said softly. He said it was temporary, that he needed proof for the doctors, so the court could make it easier to manage your assets. Manage. That word again. Henry never said take. He said manage. Control disguised as care. I closed my eyes. So every time you told me I'd forgotten something, every time you wrote in your little notebook. She nodded, her chin trembling. He told me to keep a record, to note when you got confused, even if you weren't. He said you'd thank us later. Thank you, I said, the words tasting like iron. And when exactly was I supposed to thank you, Laura? When I was locked away in some care home? Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm so sorry. I didn't want to do it. My son's got medical bills. Henry knew that. He said it would just be for a few months, that you'd never even know. I looked at her, really looked the exhaustion under her eyes, the guilt sitting heavy in her shoulders. You were right, I said quietly. I didn't know, but I do now. After she left, I sat awake until dawn. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I listened to the hum of the house, to the faint creak of Henry's study door, to the rustle of papers when he thought I was asleep. At 3 a.m., I got out of bed and walked to the mirror. The face staring back at me wasn't the weak, half-lost woman he wanted the world to see. It was the face of someone who'd finally woken up. The next morning, Henry acted like everything was normal. He kissed my cheek, poured my tea, and said he had some errands to run. I watched him walk out the door with that briefcase, the same one he'd been taking to his lawyer's office every week. As soon as he left, I called Laura. You said he paid you, I told her. Now you're going to help me stop him. She hesitated. How? By telling me everything. And she did. Over the next hour, she laid it all bare. The recorded episodes Henry had ordered her to film, moments he'd staged to make me look confused. The pills she'd switched under his instruction just enough to make me sluggish and foggy for a few days. The fake doctor reports he'd arranged through a private clinic where one of his associates worked. Every piece of my life, every fragment of my autonomy turned into a line in his script, a story where I was the helpless wife and he was the hero who rescued me from myself. But that wasn't the part that broke me. The part that broke me was when she said, "He told me he was doing it for your own good," said there's another woman that he wanted to make sure she was protected when you weren't around anymore. Another woman. The words echoed in my head like church bells after a funeral. "Her name's Cynthia," Laura continued. "She's been calling the house sometimes. He said she's a friend, but I heard him talking to her once. It didn't sound like friendship." I didn't respond right away. I just stared out the window at the oak tree, its leaves trembling in the sunlight. That tree had seen every season of my life: birth, love, betrayal, and now, maybe justice. Henry came home late that evening, humming, smelling faintly of whiskey and perfume that wasn't mine. "How was your day, darling?" he asked. I smiled, my voice calm, quiet, productive. He looked at me oddly, as if trying to gauge whether I knew something. Then he kissed my forehead, set down his briefcase, and poured himself a drink. "I spoke to the lawyer today," he said casually. "We're finalizing those power of attorney forms next week. It's just a technicality, but it'll make things simpler for both of us." I met his eyes, steady. "Simpler for you, you mean?" He froze, the glass halfway to his lips. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing you don't already know," I said, standing. "You should get some rest. You've got a big week ahead." That night, when he went to bed, I slipped into his study. The briefcase was on the desk. Inside were papers, legal drafts, account statements, property lists. But it was the last folder that caught my breath, a document labeled Declaration of Incapacity. It was already signed, my signature forged, but close enough that it could pass. And stapled behind it was a printed email chain. From Henry to his lawyer. "Once she signs, transfer primary ownership of the estate to me. Cynthia will take over the residence once the facility placement is arranged." Facility placement. He wasn't just taking my money. He was planning to put me away. I folded the papers carefully, slipped them back in place, and turned off the light. By the time I returned to bed, my heart had stopped trembling. Because now I knew the truth, the full, ugly truth. And I also knew something else. If Henry wanted me gone, I'd make sure he was the one who disappeared instead from my life, from my home, and from every inch of power he thought he owned. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was still even, the refrigerator hum sounded far away. I sat at my vanity, staring at my reflection. My hair silvering at the temples, the faint scar above my eyebrow from a fall years ago, the tiredness around my eyes. This was the woman he thought was fading, the woman he thought he could rewrite. But he'd forgotten something about me, something I'd spent my whole life teaching other people, how to read between the lines. I had lived with Henry Brooks long enough to know that his greatest weakness wasn't greed. It was arrogance. He believed no one could outthink him. So I decided to let him believe that just long enough to hang himself with it. The first call I made was to Marjorie Sanders. She'd been my closest friend since college. We'd lost touch over the years, the way people do when life gets busy, but I remembered that she'd worked as a paralegal before retirement. When she picked up, her voice sounded surprised. "Evelyn? My goodness, it's been ages. How are you?" I hesitated. "That depends," I said quietly. "Do you still remember how to read a power of attorney?" There was a pause. "Tell me everything," she said. I did. Every word, every whisper, every document. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "Evelyn, you're in danger, but not the kind you think. You need a lawyer, one who doesn't know your husband. I can't go to anyone local, I said. He has friends in half the firms in this town. Marjorie was silent for a moment, then said, I know someone, Paul Henson. He helped me with my late sister's estate last year. Honest, sharp, and, most importantly, not impressed by rich men. She gave me his number. When I called Paul, I could hear skepticism in his voice at first. But the moment I said Henry's name and described what was happening, his tone changed. Mrs. Brooks, he said, if everything you're saying is true, this isn't just manipulation. It's premeditated fraud, maybe even abuse. I don't want pity, I told him. I want strategy. He chuckled softly. Then we'll get strategic. He told me to gather everything: documents, recordings, witnesses. Don't confront him again, he warned. Let him think you're still confused. When people like your husband believe they're winning, that's when they get sloppy. Over the next week, I played my role to perfection. When Henry reminded me to take my pills, I smiled sweetly and thanked him. When he spoke to me like a nurse giving orders to a patient, I nodded and pretended not to understand. Inside, though, I was taking inventory. Every call he made, every document that arrived, every slip of arrogance that revealed what he was planning next. Meanwhile, Laura began to change too. At first, she avoided me out of shame, but as days passed, she started helping quietly. She began forwarding me the voice memos Henry had ordered her to keep, recordings that proved my confusion. In one, his voice could be heard whispering, "Ask her about her mother again. She always stumbles there." In another, she asked, "What year is it?" And my voice, steady, clear, replied, "It's the year my husband lost his soul. I saved them all." Paul worked quickly. We met in secret at the public library, of all places. The irony wasn't lost on me. A retired English teacher rebuilding her case for sanity among shelves of stories about survival. He reviewed Henry's fake documents, the forged signature, and the transfer orders. He's clever, Paul admitted, but sloppy. The date on this form predates your supposed diagnosis by 2 weeks. That's our crack in the armor. He advised me not to stop the upcoming signing, but to let it happen. Let him believe he's won, Paul said. We'll prepare counter documents that override his, signed under legitimate counsel. When he tries to activate his power of attorney, we'll be waiting with the truth. That night, I called Laura again. He's planning to have me sign next Tuesday, I told her. She hesitated. Do you want me there? Yes, I said. And I need you to record it. Everything. She was quiet for a long time, then whispered, He'll know. I know, I replied. But so will the judge. Over the next few days, I rehearsed my part. I practiced slurring my words just enough to sound uncertain. I asked the same question twice during breakfast. I left the same book open in 2 rooms. Henry grew confident, too confident. He smiled more, hummed around the house, told friends over the phone that things were finally settling down. I caught one phrase, overheard through the half-open door to his study. Once the papers are signed, I'll have full control. The lawyers can process it by Friday. Cynthia can move in next month. Cynthia. The name didn't even sting anymore. It just focused me. On Monday evening, the night before the signing, Henry poured me a glass of wine and said, You know, sweetheart, I've been thinking it's time we simplify things. It's been so stressful for you trying to manage all this paperwork. I looked up at him, feigning confusion. Paperwork? He smiled. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of everything. I smiled back. I know you will. But inside, I was already picturing the courtroom, the judge, the look on his face when his own words turned against him. He thought he was signing his victory. He didn't realize he was signing his confession. The day of the signing felt almost ordinary. A calm sky, birds chattering on the oak outside, sunlight pouring through the kitchen window as if the universe hadn't noticed what was about to happen. I sat at the table in my robe, stirring tea I didn't drink, pretending to be the fragile woman Henry thought I was. He came down the stairs humming, not the nervous kind of humming, but the self-satisfied sort men do when they're certain the world bends to their will. He looked immaculate navy blazer, hair perfectly combed, that watch I bought him years ago gleaming on his wrist. "Big day, sweetheart," he said, brushing his lips against my forehead. "The lawyer will be here soon. Just a few signatures, and then you can rest easy." "Rest," I repeated softly, tracing the rim of my cup. "Yes, that would be nice." He smiled, oblivious. "I knew you'd come around." He poured himself coffee, sat across from me, and scrolled through his phone. I could see the reflection of a woman's name on the screen. "Cynthia." My stomach turned, but my face stayed calm. I had rehearsed this role too well to falter now. When the doorbell rang, Henry straightened his jacket. "That'll be Mr. Cole," he said proudly. "My attorney will get everything in order." I nodded, my voice small. "Of course, dear." Laura entered quietly behind him, pretending to tidy the living room. She held her phone loosely, the camera already recording. Henry didn't even notice. Mr. Cole was a tall man in a gray suit, his smile polite but hollow, the kind of lawyer who measures empathy by billable hours. He set his briefcase on the table, pulled out a stack of papers, and said, "Mrs. Brooks, this is just a standard form. It gives your husband the ability to handle your finances and medical decisions should you become unable to." "Should I become?" I said slowly. "But I already am, right? That's what Henry says." Cole cleared his throat. "It's just precautionary, ma'am." Henry placed a pen in front of me. "It's for your peace of mind, Evelyn." I looked at him, long and steady, then down at the paper. My hand trembled slightly as I signed just enough to sell the illusion. "There," I said. "All yours." He grinned, exhaling in relief. "Thank you, sweetheart. This will make everything so much easier." He turned to Cole. "We'll need the transfers processed by Friday. I want full access to the estate and investment accounts." I felt the smallest smile tug at my lips. 2 days later, we were standing in a courtroom. Henry hadn't told me about the hearing Paul had. The moment Henry filed the finalized documents, Paul was notified. He moved fast, filing a motion of injunction and requesting a judicial review of the power of attorney. Henry was furious when he saw me there, walking into the courtroom with my head held high, escorted by Paul and Marjorie. He hissed under his breath, "What the hell are you doing here?" I leaned close and whispered, "You said you wanted everything signed and witnessed, Henry. I'm just making sure the witnesses are real this time." He blanched, realizing too late that something had shifted. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper sense of justice, began the session briskly. "Mr. Brooks, you are petitioning for full power of attorney over your wife's affairs, citing mental decline and cognitive incapacity. Is that correct?" Henry straightened. "Yes, Your Honor. My wife has been suffering from confusion and memory loss. I have documented episodes from her nurse." "Your Honor," Paul interrupted smoothly, "we have reason to believe those documents were fabricated, and that Mrs. Brooks is, in fact, of sound mind and the victim of a deliberate campaign to make her appear otherwise." The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Brooks, do you understand the nature of these proceedings?" I met her gaze squarely. "Perfectly, Your Honor." Paul handed over the recordings Laura had saved, the courtroom filled with Henry's own voice. "Keep recording when she forgets things. We'll need proof later. Ask her about her mother again. It always makes her stumble. Once she signs, I'll have everything." Each sentence landed like a hammer blow. Henry turned red, his jaw tightening. "Those recordings are out of context," he said, but his voice had lost its authority. Then Paul presented the forged signature. "Notice, Your Honor, the inconsistency in the date. This document was signed before the medical report declaring Mrs. Brooks incompetent even existed." The judge's expression hardened. Mr. Brooks, are you aware this constitutes fraud? Henry opened his mouth, then shut it again. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly. My hands were steady. Your Honor, I said, I may be 62. I may take longer to stand or need reminders for medication, but I remember everything that matters. I remember 38 years of marriage built on my loyalty and his lies. I remember every time he called me confused when I wasn't. I remember the sound of my nurse crying when she told me he paid her to make me look insane. The room was silent except for Henry's shallow breathing. I'm not crazy, I continued softly, just careful. And now, finally, free. The judge leaned back, eyes cold as stone. Mr. Brooks, this court finds that your petition was filed under false pretenses. The forged documents are void. Power of attorney will remain with Mrs. Brooks pending further investigation into your conduct. Henry's face went pale. He tried to speak, but no words came. As we left the courtroom, he reached for my arm. Evelyn, please. I pulled back. Don't touch me. He tried to muster that old charm, but it was gone now, stripped bare like the truth. You can't just walk away from everything we built, he said bitterly. I turned to him one last time. You're right. I'm not walking away from what we built. I'm taking it back. The day the court ruled in my favor, the world finally went quiet. No more whispers behind closed doors. No more people looking at me like I was a fragile thing waiting to break. Henry sat in that courtroom, gray-faced and hollow, as the judge declared the power of attorney void and his petition fraudulent. I didn't look at him when I walked out. There was nothing left to see. Outside, the air felt cleaner, lighter. I breathed it in like it was freedom itself. Paul told me I was brave, but I wasn't brave. I was just done being afraid. Henry left the house that same week. The silence he'd once used to control me became my peace. I spent my mornings in the garden again, coffee in hand, sunlight on my face, listening to the wind move through the oak tree out back. That tree had survived every storm, every season. So had I. Grace called soon after the ruling. Her voice cracked as she said, Mom, I still can't believe he did that to you. I told her the truth. Believe it, sweetheart. But don't let it make you bitter. Let it make you smart. She was quiet for a while, then whispered, You sound strong again. I smiled. I never stopped being strong. I just forgot for a little while. Some days I still catch myself expecting Henry's footsteps or the clink of his watch against the counter. The habits of fear take time to fade. But when those memories come, I don't run from them anymore. I write them down. I keep a small notebook on my nightstand, the same one where I once documented his lies. Now it's where I record my truth. Because memory, I've learned, is a kind of power. It can destroy you when someone twists it, but it can also save you when you claim it back. A few weeks ago, I went into Henry's old study. The room smelled of dust and arrogance. On the desk sat his old letters, all those empty promises written in a younger man's hand. I lit the fireplace, one match at a time, and fed them to the flames, not in anger, but in closure. As the last one burned, I whispered, You almost erased me, Henry, but I was writing the whole time. Now the house feels alive again. The roses he once had cut down are blooming wild and red. The air smells of ash and freedom. Neighbors still whisper, but I don't care. Let them. They can talk about the woman who lost her husband. I know the truth. I didn't lose anything worth keeping. I survived the man who tried to rewrite me. And I remember every word he used to do it not to haunt me, but to remind me how far I've come. Because I know this now. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in your own steady breath in a house that's finally yours again. I closed my notebook tonight with one last line written in ink that will never fade. He taught me that trust is fragile, but so is silence, and I'll never be quiet again.